הבא בירושלים, בירושלים, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, בירושלים, לשנה הבאה בירושלים, לשנה הבאה בירושלים.
Lashana haba b'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem, sings Shlomo Katz. How's everybody doing? Are you fasting? Did you fast? I've been fasting all day. It's almost over. It's almost over. We'll finish the show. About half an hour later, the fast ends, but we go to evening service, Mariv. And then we hear the Megillah, which takes about 20 minutes. And then we come home and break the fast. Let's light up the darkness. Who's with us on a Wednesday as we approach the end of Tainus Esther, the fast of Esther, the day before Purim? Shandor, Russ says Hag Sameach. It's Purim for you already, right? James in Indianapolis, Renee in Indiana, Bella in Florida, Paul in Chicago, Sharon is listening, driving home from Megillah Esther. She's already heard the Megillah. She's gonna eat. Nicholas in Portland, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Paula in the Great Northwest, Gwen in Michigan, Melissa in Great Neck, Nancy, North Carolina, Lucy in Minnesota, Leah in Florida, Rebecca in LA, PK, Colorado, the other Paula wishing for peace in Ukraine. Amen. Aaron says Hag Purim Sameach. Paula says Blessed Purim. Karen in Northern California. Over there on the YouTube side, Marjorie in Georgia, Lynn in North Texas. Welcome, everybody, and an early Purim Sameach to you. Before we get into the daf, I have something special to show you. Nina gave me this birthday present. I mean, it was a while ago, last June, but I never just made the time to do it, and I finally did it in these last few days. So check it out. Ooh, isn't this awesome? It's a model of the second temple. Kind of wish I had it already when we were in Tractate Yoma. But so many times we're talking about the temple and different parts of the temple. Like just lately we were talking about that the Mitzorah, the one who had Tzara'as and has to go through his final purification and bring offerings, and he actually sticks his toe and his his thumb and his ear into the courtyard to receive some blood from an offering. It just touched those body parts. Where does that happen? At the gate of Nicanor. So that right there is the gate of Nicanor at the top of those round steps there, so you could see it. That's the gate of Nicanor right there. Here is the altar over here, right? Holy of Holies in here. We talked about these chambers, the special chambers. It's going to come up many times, and now we have a model to work with in 3D. Pretty awesome, right? The second temple as it stood 2,000 years ago. All right, we'll keep that handy. All right. Just get this screen in the right place. Okay, so today's daf is test, page 9 here in Tractate Yevamos. This is the 14th volume of the Talmud, the laws of yibum. When a brother dies, married and childless, the widow and the surviving brother have an obligation to marry or perform chalitza. We're still discussing the first Mishna here in chapter 1. Which talks about, but if there's a different relationship between the surviving brother and the widow, other than just his former sister-in-law through his brother, or his sister-in-law through the brother that died, but if they have some other relationship that prohibits them from performing yibum, then they don't have to do chalitza either, the ceremony that releases them from yibum. And if she has a co-wife, if the brother who died had two wives, then the co-wife, even though she doesn't have this additional relationship which prohibits her from becoming the wife of the surviving brother, the co-wife as well is exempt from yibum and chalitza. And we've been talking about a lot of different ways that the sages sought to derive the various permutations of this law, why the co-wives are exempted, and they really have been very careful here to test every decree and every proof to see if it really holds up. We pick it up on 8b, about halfway down the page. While clarifying the exposition of the phrase with her, which we see appears with this other prohibition that you can't be married to a woman and her sister. So if the surviving brother is married to a woman who happens to be the sister of the widow of the brother who died, because two brothers marry two sisters, so then the brother, then yibum doesn't work and chalitza is excused as well, because if he married the widow, he would then have two wives who are sisters, and that is prohibited. And from the phrase with her that occurs in the verse which prohibits a man to be married to two sisters, we also learn that a co-wife would be exempt. Or do we, right? So the sages have been arguing about where we learn that the co-wife is also exempt. So while clarifying the exposition of the phrase with her, an alternative interpretation attributed to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, known as Rebbi, the one who edited the Mishna, was mentioned, and the Gemara discusses the matter itself. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says, the verse does not say, okay, now this is in Deuteronomy where yibum is mentioned again, and when it's mentioned in Deuteronomy, there's this kind of like 3 times saying that the brother-in-law shall have intercourse with the widow, which is another way of saying he marries her, and he shall have yibum with her, which is saying he marries her. And then there's one more statement in that. Do I have the verse handy? He will have intercourse with her and take her to him to be his wife and consummate yibum with her. Right, so it seems to be repeating itself 3 times, and of course the sages are going to learn additional teachings from this Deuteronomy 25:5. So Rebbi says the verse does not say have intercourse; it says have intercourse with her. I mean, we know that if he's having intercourse, it's with this woman. Why does it need the additional prepositional phrase with her? And it does not say consummate the levirate marriage, but it says and consummate the levirate marriage with her, levirate marriage, yibum. These phrases serve to give an additional teaching. What? To prohibit the co-wives. If the man had 2 wives, one is prohibited for a different reason, and the co-wife is prohibited also, says Rebbi. These phrases serve to prohibit co-wives and women with whom relations are forbidden. The Gemara asks, are co-wives written here? Where do you get this idea that these phrases prohibit the co-wife? In other words, what is the connection between the verse and the topic of co-wives, an issue that is not even mentioned in the verse? And furthermore, the prohibition with regard to co-wives is derived from the phrase to be a rival wife, litzror, not from this source, right? Rival wife, co-wife, in other words, 2 women married to the same man, and we don't want 2 sisters in that position. The Gemara answers, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi derives a different law from the phrase to be a rival wife, in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Shimon. In Rabbi Shimon's opinion, the exemption of 2 sisters from yibum applies not only when the Yevam, the surviving brother, is married to one of the sisters, but also if 2 sisters who come before him for levirate marriage were previously married to 2 of his brothers. So there were 3 brothers. 2 of them were married to different women, not sisters. Both of the brothers who were married died and died childless. So the surviving brother now has two women who are in a yibum situation with him. Tragically, he lost two brothers. Both of them were married and died childless. So there are two women before him for yibum. Rabbi Shimon says that even though those women aren't sisters, the fact that they were sisters-in-law of each other through their marriages to these other two brothers, both of whom died, is enough to trigger the you shall not have sisters married to the same guy. It's interesting. Like, what relationship did they have that it becomes a prohibited relationship for them to become co-wives of the third brother, the surviving brother of the two who died childless? But Rabbi Shimon says that's enough. Two sisters who came before him for yibum were previously married to two of his brothers. In that case, the yibum bond itself is sufficient for them to be considered rival wives of one another. Since they're both, before he does yibum or chalitza, they're both in a yibum situation with the third brother. Because they're both bound to the same man through the obligation to perform yibum or chalitza, it's like they're already co-wives. And because they're already co-wives, they're going to be excused from yibum altogether, it appears. And with regard to the previous question, are rival wives written there? Written here in this verse? And the answer is that this is what he is saying. If so, that the verse does not come to exempt co-wives, let the verse state only have intercourse. What is the meaning of have intercourse with her? It serves to limit the case to one woman and not two in the following manner. Anywhere that there are two possibilities of having intercourse. In other words, there's a choice between marrying one of two women in yibum. Like this case where there were three brothers. Two of them were married. They died childless. Now there's another surviving brother. Which one is he going to marry? I think both are obligated. That might not be the choice. Hold on a second. I.e., there's a choice between marrying one of two women in yibum in such a way that if he wants, he may marry this one, and if he wants, he may marry that one. Well, then each is permitted. So in that case, both of them are permitted. And if he does not have a choice, and he is obligated to marry one of them, for example, if the other is a forbidden relation to him. So let's say that we have this case, there were two brothers, there were three brothers, two of them were married, they both died. So now there's this surviving brother, he's in a yibum situation with the two surviving widows. But maybe one of them is not permitted to him because she's otherwise related to him. It's his daughter perhaps, right? Because his daughter married her uncle. So in that case, one of the women is definitely prohibited to him. The other is permitted, but because we've just said that because these two wives are both in a yibum situation to the third brother, even though one ends up being prohibited, she's like a co-wife of the one that's permitted, and she ends up being prohibited also. When the verse states, and consummate the yibum with her, it comes to teach the following. It is in a place where yibum is applicable that a co-wife is prohibited. Whereas in a place where yibum is not applicable, a co-wife is permitted, which we discussed yesterday. And the Gemara asks, and with regard to the rabbis who do not interpret the verse in this manner, what do they do with this emphasis on the phrase, have intercourse with her, when yibum is spelled out in Deuteronomy? And the Gemara responds, they need this for that which Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said. As Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina said, the phrase, and have intercourse with her, means marriage, i.e., she is fully his wife from that moment onward, right? So if a surviving brother and a widow are in a yibum situation, and, rather than go stand under a chuppah and get married, they just have sex, which is permitted, because it's like they're already bound to each other. And when they have sex, boom, they're married, right? At that point, having sex is a form of getting married, and particularly where they're already obligated to each other, they have sex, they're married. In fact, they're fully married. They're married as if they stood under a chuppah and had a ketubah and everything. they're married. If they wanted to part ways, they would have to get a divorce. It would not suffice to, after they had sex, say, you know what, let's not get married, we'll do chalitza. No good. You had sex, you did yibum. Now you two are married. The brother-in-law, the surviving brother and the widow of the brother who died childless. So says Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, and have intercourse means marriage. She is fully his wife from that moment onward. And this teaches that he divorces her with a bill of divorce. Right? If they decide to get divorced, they have to go through the full procedure of giving a get, which is the bill of divorce. After yibum, and she can no longer be released by chalitza. Too late for chalitza, the alternative to yibum. And he may subsequently remarry her if he so wishes. And the verse, and consummate the yibum with her, this means against her will. Although betrothal in general does not take effect without the woman's consent, yibum can be effected against her will. This is very, very difficult. There's no good way to put this. It's just horrific. Right? It's just horrific. In that situation where they're in a yibum situation, he's a surviving brother. His brother died childless with this widow. If he rapes her, then they're married, even if it's against her will. Because they're in a yibum situation, if they then have sex, they're married, even if the form of that sex is rape. There's just no good way to put it. It's terrible. And that's the law. If a yavam engages in sexual relations with his yavama, in a case where the law of yibum applies, he has taken her as a wife for all purposes, even if he rapes her. It's terrible. The Gemara asks, and from where does Rebbi derive these laws? And the Gemara responds, the law cited by, and that is the law, and the law, the Gemara responds, the law cited by Rabbi Yosef Bar Chanina, that a woman taken in yibum has the status of a regular wife who may be divorced and remarried, as long as she doesn't marry someone else in between, is derived from the verse, and take her to him to be his wife, which means that she will be his wife for all purposes, like any other wife. And the law that yibum can be effected against her will is derived from her brother-in-law will have intercourse with her, which indicates that it can be achieved even without her consent. I mean, in the ancient world, it's very patriarchal. The laws of rape were just terrible vis-a-vis women. I suppose you could say that in that ancient world, there was actually a novelty that came with the Torah, right? Which says in a situation like this, where the man rapes the woman, he's married to her. Now, this sounds terrible from her point of view. On the other hand, it means that he has the obligations of a husband to her. He can't just dismiss her, right? Now they're married, and he has all the obligations of marriage. And elsewhere we learn, I don't know that it applies here, but in a situation where a man rapes a woman and ends up married to her, he cannot, unilaterally toss her aside. He's going to remain obligated to her forever. So it also creates obligations in the man. But nonetheless, it's just terrible. And we should just take a moment to hear, how bad that was. The Gemara asks, and what does Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi do with this superfluous phrase, with her? And the Gemara responds, he needs it for that which is taught in a baraisa with regard to a different matter. The sages said the court is obligated to bring a bull as a sin offering. Now we're going to go in a long digression about what happens when somebody makes a mistake, and what if a court makes a mistake, and what if a Nasi makes a mistake, and what if a high priest makes a mistake in a matter of law, and because they made a mistake, people end up committing a sin. So there's an offering brought for that situation. How is that related to the laws of yibum? Well, as we've seen, that the positive mitzvah is going to override the negative mitzvah unless the negative mitzvah bears a charis penalty, right? A death penalty, but death at the hands of the heavenly court. And so the laws of a mistake, bringing an offering because you've made a mistake that led people to commit a sin, is going to be related to this idea of a charis-bearing penalty, as we'll see, right? So what does Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi do with the superfluous phrase with her? And the Gemara answers he needs it for that which is taught in a baraisa with regard to a totally different matter. The sages said, the court is obligated to bring a bull as a sin offering. The court, meaning the judges of the court, they made a mistake that led other people to sin. Now they must bring an offering because of the mistake that they made. What is the offering? A bull, right? The biggest, most expensive sin offering there is. So the court is obligated to bring a bull as a sin offering for an unwittingly committed communal sin on account of an erroneous law that they taught. Right, so they made a ruling of what the law is, and later they realized they made a mistake. But in the meantime, the community followed their ruling, and so the whole community was committing a sin innocently, in error, because they were following the ruling of the court. Once they figured it out, so the court is obligated to bring a bull as a sin offering. And they taught this only for a matter whose intentional transgression incurs charis, and whose unwitting violation necessitates the sacrifice of a sin offering. You did it on purpose, charis, death at the hands of the heavenly court. You did it unwittingly, now you become liable to bring a sin offering when the temple is standing. Okay. Whose unwitting violation necessitates the sacrifice of a sin offering. And similarly, the anointed high priest, the Kohen Gadol, who's serving in the temple, who also brings a bull for an unwittingly committed sin, is obligated to do so only if his mistake involved a matter whose intentional transgression incurs charis and whose unwitting transgression necessitates the sacrifice of a sin offering. That's when the bull as a sin offering for the mistake is triggered. When in the matter that they made a mistake, it's for a transgression, that if you do it on purpose, it's charis. If you do it unwittingly, it triggers a sin offering. Now we're at 9a at the top. And the community who followed the erroneous ruling of the court or the high priest, and a community brings a bull for an unwitting communal sin, for idolatrous worship, only if the act of idolatry involved a matter that for its intentional violation one is liable to receive charis, and for unwitting violation one is liable to bring a sin offering. And we also learned in a Mishna with regard to any mitzvah, any commandment in the Torah, for whose intentional violation one is liable to receive charis, and for its unwitting violation one is liable to bring a sin offering. If a private individual sinned unwittingly, he brings a ewe or a she-goat. If it was a Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, he brings a goat for a sin of this kind. And if the sinner was an anointed high priest or the court, they bring a bull. And if they unwittingly sinned in a matter involving idolatrous worship, a private individual, a Nasi, an anointed high priest, they all bring a she-goat, whereas the community, a communal offering, brings a bull and a goat. The bull is a burnt offering and the goat as a sin offering. And the Gemara asks, from where are these matters that one must bring a sin offering for this particular transgression derived? And the Gemara answers, as the sages taught with regard to an unwitting communal sin offering, and the sin by which they have sinned is known, becomes known, Leviticus 4:14. Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi says, it is stated here with regard to a sin offering, by which, aleha, the word aleha, by which. And it is stated there with regard to the prohibition, with regard to a wife's sister, unto, aleha, same word. And this teaches by verbal analogy. Just as there in the case of a wife's sister, it is a matter that for its intentional violation, one is liable to receive charis, and for its unwitting violation, one is liable to bring a sin offering. So too here, The offering is brought for a matter that for its intentional violation one is liable to receive kares, and for its unwitting violation one is liable to bring a sin offering. So, because there this linkage using the word aleha in the law of you can't marry a woman and her sister, and that same word appears that if the court or the high priest or the Nasi makes a mistake of law that leads the whole community to make a mistake and therefore sin, what offerings are going to be brought? Well, the offerings in particular that we're talking about are brought if the mistake that they made is similar to the transgression one would make if he married a woman and her sister. If he did it on purpose, kares. If he did it unwittingly, he's liable to bring a sin offering. If the transgression that was the subject of the mistake for the community, done intentionally, kares, done by mistake, triggers a sin offering, then the one who made the mistake has to bring a bull and a goat, etc. These offerings are triggered in that situation. The Gemara continues. We found a source for the law that the offering brought by the community is a sin offering. From where do we derive that an anointed high priest also brings a sin offering for this transgression? As it is written with regard to an anointed high priest, if the anointed priest shall sin so as to bring guilt on the people, which indicates that an anointed high priest brings an offering like the community. From where is it derived that a private individual, you and me, and a Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin, brings sin offerings only for a severe transgression of this kind? This is derived by verbal analogy between the words mitzvot and mitzvot that are stated 3 times with regard to the community's sin offering, a private individual's sin offering, and the sin offering of a Nasi. Leviticus 4:2, 13, 22, any of the mitzvahs of the Lord that he has commanded not to be done. And so that phrase follows each of those teachings. So it was stated above that this law applies to idolatrous worship, worshiping idols, only if it involved a matter that for its intentional violation one is liable to kares, and for its unwitting violation one is liable to bring a sin offering. The law of a community that was guilty of idolatrous worship is derived by a verbal analogy between the phrases from the eyes and from the eyes. With regard to the bull, for an unwitting communal sin, the verse states, from the eyes of the assembly. While concerning an unwitting sin of idol worship, it says, from the eyes of the congregation. And this verbal analogy teaches that a congregation brings a sin offering for idolatrous worship only if it involved a transgression that incurs karet when performed intentionally. You know, you'd think like, well, did he bow in front of an idol or not? It's pretty clear, isn't it? Well, no, there's going to be all kinds of nuances, even involving avodah zarah, idolatry, where, you know, maybe it's a site that was used for idolatry, but hasn't in a while, and people forgot. And they're supposed to know, but they didn't, right? Or there's a practice that they didn't know that it could be considered performing idolatry when, you know, you're just saluting a government official who it turns out is wearing, you know, an idol around his neck, which is, some interpretations of why Mordechai would refuse to bow to Haman in the Purim story, as we'll be reading tomorrow at noon Pacific when Nina and I do our annual reading of the book of Esther on Purim. So, the case of a private individual, a Nasi, and an anointed high priest are derived from a verse that deals with an unwitting sin of idolatry. And if one person sin, Numbers 15:27, all of these, a private individual, a Nasi, an anointed high priest, are included in this verse. In this case, the principle, the letter Vav, which means and, adds to the previous matter, right? When you want to say and something, you put a letter Vav at the beginning of that word. So when a phrase begins with the conjunction Vav, meaning, and it is a continuation of the previous matter rather than a new topic. Based on this principle, these two laws are connected with one another. And therefore, let the lower, i.e. the second subject that comes later in the Torah, a private individual, be derived from the upper issue, the community, just as a community brings the offering only for a transgression whose intentional violation incurs kares. The same is true of a private individual. The verbal analogy stated in this Baraisa is Rebbi's inference from the phrase with her. The Gemara asks, and with regard to the rabbis who interpret with her, with regard to co-wives, they learn that co-wives are prohibited in yibum from the phrase with her. From where do they derive this conclusion that one is liable to bring the offering for idolatrous worship only for a transgression whose intentional violation incurs kares? Since Rebbi is using that phrase with her to link that kind of a sin, marrying a woman and her sister, to a community making a mistake, Rebbi finds it from there, but the rabbis who disagree with Rebbi say, no, the phrase with her teaches that the co-wife is prohibited. So where do the rabbis who disagree with Rebbi get this teaching that the bull as a sin offering is triggered only for this type of sin, intentional kares, unintentional, liable to a sin offering? Where do they learn that out? And the Gemara answers, the rabbis derive it from that which Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi read out to his son to teach him the verses that summarize the case of unwitting idolatry. Numbers 15, 29, and 30. You shall have one law for him that does unwittingly, but the soul that does with a high hand, whether he be homeborn or a stranger, he blasphemes the Lord, and that soul shall be cut off from among his people. If he committed idolatry unintentionally, unwittingly, he didn't know he was committing idolatry, okay, he's liable to bring a sin offering, and then he's excused. If he did it on purpose, that's blasphemy, that angers the Lord. He doesn't have the ability to atone by bringing a sin offering. He's liable to kares. Now, he can still atone, and perhaps his atonement will get God, will lead eventually to God putting aside the kares penalty, but he can't bring a sin offering as his atonement. In this manner, the entire Torah is juxtaposed with idolatry. Just as in the case of idolatry, there is no obligation to bring an offering unless it is a matter that for its intentional violation one is liable to receive kares, and for its unwitting violation one is liable to bring a sin offering. As indicated by the verse, that soul shall be cut off from among his people. So too, the same applies to any matter that for its intentional violation one is liable to kares, and for unwitting violation one is liable to bring a sin offering. In the Gemara comments, we found a source for a private individual, a Nasi and an anointed high priest, whether with regard to idolatry or with regard to other mitzvahs. From where is it derived that a community is liable only for an unwitting transgression of idolatry of this kind? And the verse states, and if one person sin, once again the letter Vav teaches that these two cases are connected, and let the upper, the first issue of the community, be derived from the lower case, that of the private individual. However, from where do we derive that a community brings an offering for other mitzvahs only if the intentional violation of the prohibition incurs kares? And the Gemara responds, he derives it from the aforementioned verbal analogy between from the eyes and from the eyes. And the Gemara asks, and what does Rebbi do with this verse, one law? And the Gemara answers, he requires it for that which is taught in a Baraisa, since we find that the Torah differentiates between private individuals who sinned and the community who sinned in idolatry. Right? So because you have an argument between Rebbi and the other rabbis on whether a phrase is free to teach something, so it's like at that point they bifurcate in their reasoning. Since he's going to rely on that phrase to teach this set of laws, it's not available to him in that set of laws. So he has to derive that set of laws from a different source, and vice versa. Now, the Baraisa elaborates. Private individuals who worshipped idols are sentenced to stoning, and therefore their money is spared from destruction. right? So if somebody commits idolatry, if a Jew commits idolatry on purpose, and he's warned that if he does that, he's liable to the death penalty, and he does it anyway, then, when that court of 70 is in session, which is when the temple is standing, not since, so then he's liable to stoning. Death penalty. Stoning doesn't mean people throw rocks at him. It means he's thrown off a cliff, but he's killed. But his property survives, right? So his children can inherit his property. Not so when a community commits idolatry on purpose. In the case of the individual, although the sinner is put to death, his possessions are not destroyed. By contrast, the many, when a whole community commits idolatry on purpose, the many are condemned to the lighter death penalty of decapitation by sword. Okay, it's a quicker death. But the punishment for those who worshipped idols in an idolatrous city, a whole city of Jews that became idolatrous, and therefore their money is forfeited, as by Torah law, all possessions belonging to the residents of an idolatrous city, meaning a city in Israel of Jews that became idolatrous, so then everybody in that city gets killed and all their possessions get burned. Due to this difference, one might have thought that we should likewise differentiate between their offerings, i.e., if an individual in a community unwittingly practiced idolatrous worship, different offerings are brought in the two cases. Therefore, the verse states one law for you, for everyone who did it unwittingly, whether an individual or a community. And the word you is in the plural, which indicates that an individual and a community that worshipped idols unwittingly are subject to the same law. So Rav Hilkiah from the city of Hagronia strongly objects to this. The reason for this ruling is that the Merciful One specifically writes one law for you, from which it may be inferred that if he had not written that, if God had not written one law for all of you, I would say that we should differentiate between the offerings of an individual and a community. If so, it is appropriate to ask, what offering would they bring if we were to differentiate? You cannot say they would bring a bull, as it is a community that sinned unwittingly and transgressing other mitzvahs who bring a bull. As this is written separately, clearly its law is different. Likewise, you cannot say that they should bring a ewe, the female sheep, as it is an individual who sinned in transgressing the other mitzvahs who brings a ewe, E-W-E. Nor can you say that they bring a goat, as it is a Nasi, the head of the Sanhedrin. If he sinned in this way, in transgressing the other mitzvahs, he brings a goat. And you cannot say that they would bring a bull as a burnt offering and a goat as a sin offering, as it is the community, i.e. the majority of Jews who sinned in performing idolatry, who bring these offerings. Rather, what might they bring? If one were to suggest a she-goat, that would not be appropriate, because this is the offering of a private individual as well, since an individual brings a ewe or a she-goat as a sin offering. Apparently, there is no need for a special inference in this case, as there are no other possibilities. The Gemara answers, it is necessary for a verse to teach that there is no difference between the offerings of an individual and a community, as it might enter your mind to say, since a community that sinned by the erroneous instruction of the court that it is permitted to practice idolatry brings a bull as a burnt offering and a goat as a sin offering, then when a community sins of its own accord, they too should bring these animals, but the opposite, i.e. a bull as a sin offering and a goat as a sin offering. Alternatively, it could be argued, theoretically, a community must bring a different form of atonement from that of an individual. Yet they have no remedy. There is no other remedy possible, as the Torah did not specify which offering is brought for the sin of the many. Therefore, the verse teaches us by means of the phrase, one law for you, that there is indeed an offering for the many who practiced idol worship. After discussing different interpretations of the relevant verses, the Gemara addresses the details of the laws of the Mishna. We're back to our Mishnah. We finished the digression examining how the mistaken rulings of a community or of a Nasi or of a Kohen Gadol that led to either purposeful or unwitting idolatry and how that's addressed. We're through that. Now we're back to discussing the 15 women in our Mishnah who, if they come up for yibum with the surviving brother of their dead husband, because they have a relationship to the Yevam, to the surviving brother, they're prohibited to become his wife. Therefore, yibum doesn't apply, chalitza doesn't apply, and if they have a co-wife, the co-wife is also exempt from yibum and chalitza. So we're back to our Mishnah. Okay, so the sage Levi said to Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, why does the Tana of our Mishnah, Mishnah number 1 here in Tractate Yevamos, why does the Tana of the Mishnah specifically teach the cases of 15 women? Let him teach the cases of 16 women, including the case of a co-wife of a forbidden relation. Right? Why did we say that 15 women exempt their co-wives? Why don't we just say there are 16 women who are prohibited in yibum, and one of them is the co-wife of a woman who has a prohibited relation with the Yevam, with the surviving brother, and just call it 16 women. Why doesn't he teach it that way? And Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi said to him, judging by his question, it seems to me that this sage has no brain in his head. Direct quote. The sages could be very sharp-tongued with each other. Says Rebbi, from the fact that you asked that question shows that you have no brain in your head. Why does Rebbi say that? Rebbi proceeds to explain the question and the answer himself. What is your thinking? Is it that the Tana of our Mishnah should have included the case, right? When you say he should have said 16 women. Is it that the Tana of our Mishnah should have included the case of his mother, who has been raped by his father? In the opinion of the rabbis, a woman raped by one's father is permitted in marriage to another of his sons. Obviously, she can't be permitted in marriage to her own son, but one of the man's other sons by a different woman technically could end up marrying this woman who was raped by his own father. And I guess he didn't marry her. Consequently, it is possible that she might give birth to a son and later marry one of the other sons of the rapist because she comes up for yibum, right? So she might, because she married one of the sons of the rapist, right? So then if that guy dies before he has a child, then this woman would be up for yibum with another one of the sons of the rapist. So if her husband subsequently died childless, this woman would come before the brother of the deceased for levirate marriage, for yibum, who is in this case her own son. If so, there are in fact 16 women with whom relations are forbidden. However, continued Rebbi, this is incorrect, as the case of his mother raped by his father is a matter of dispute between Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis. According to Rabbi Yehuda, a woman raped by one's father could never come before him for yibum, as it is prohibited for her to marry any of the sons of the rapist. And the Tana of this Mishnah does not deal with disputed cases. Since Rabbi Yehuda disagrees with the rabbis, we don't have a clear ruling on that. It wouldn't be correct to include it among the 15 women in our Mishnah, and that's why it's not included. The Mishnah enumerates only those cases that are accepted by all opinions, not those that are a matter of dispute. Well, the Gemara asks, and does the Tana really not mention disputed cases? But there are the cases of a prohibition resulting from a mitzvah of the sages and a prohibition stemming from sanctity. What does this refer to? In other words, the Tana does refer to the cases of a woman who one is prohibited to marry by decree of the sages, i.e., a distant secondary forbidden relation, and one who is prohibited due to a regular prohibition that preserves the sanctity of the Jewish people or the priesthood. And apparently these sorts of situations are disputed, and yet it's included in our Mishnah. These are cases concerning which Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis disagree. There's a dispute, like the previous one, Rabbi Yehuda and the rabbis disagree. Well, in this example, Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis disagree. Whether these women are entirely exempt from both yibum and chalitza, like a forbidden relation, or whether the mitzvah of yibum does in fact apply, but since the yavam may not marry her in practice, she must be released by chalitza. And yet, these disputed cases are taught in the Mishnah. And the Gemara answers its own question. When we say that only accepted halachas are included in the Mishnah, we are referring only to our present chapter, whereas the dispute between Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis is stated in the second chapter of our tractate. And the Gemara raises a difficulty. But in this chapter, it is stated that Beis Shammai permit rival wives to the brothers, as they hold that there are no prohibition against rival wives, co-wives, of those with whom relations are forbidden. And Beis Hillel prohibit this. We follow Beis Hillel. But Beis Shammai would have permitted the co-wife in yibum, even if her co-wife is prohibited, right? We follow the law that if a wife is prohibited, her co-wife is also prohibited, or exempt rather. If a wife is exempt from yibum and chalitza because she has another prohibited relationship with the yavam, she's exempt from yibum and chalitza, and so is her co-wife. But that's Beis Hillel. Beis Shammai would permit the co-wife, or would say the co-wife is obligated in yibum or chalitza. The Gemara answers, when Beis Shammai expresses an opinion where Beis Hillel disagree, their opinion is considered as if it were not in the Mishnah. Right? Beis Hillel is just so dispositive over Beis Shammai that the fact that Beis Shammai disagrees doesn't matter. That's what they're saying. Beis Shammai is completely disregarded, as it is commonly accepted that the opinion of Beis Shammai is rejected and not ruled as law. Therefore, this cannot be considered a true dispute. Well, the Gemara raises another difficulty, but there is the case of a wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist, i.e., the Yavam was not alive at the time of his brother's death, right? So a man was married and he died childless, so there's a widow. He doesn't have a brother, but his parents then have another baby boy, so this man's brother comes into being after the man died. Is this baby boy a Yavam, who when he grows up is going to be obligated to either marry or make halitza with the Yevama, the widow of the brother that died childless? This is a case, we're at 9b now, and we're not going to do all of 9b, don't worry, we're near the end. This is a case concerning which Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis disagree, and yet it is taught. If this law is taught, evidently the Mishnah does deal with matters that are subject to a dispute. This is a dispute between Rabbi Shimon and the rabbis. And the Gemara answers that Rabbi Shimon does not really disagree with the rabbis concerning all cases of a wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. If this Yavam was born after his brother's death, even Rabbi Shimon concedes that the obligation of yibum does not apply to the newborn Yavam. Rather, the Yavama, the widow, is prohibited to him as his brother's wife. Furthermore, in a case where he was born and at the end, i.e. afterward, a second older brother entered into yibum with the Yavama and subsequently died as well, and the same woman came again before that same younger brother, so Rabbi Shimon did not disagree with the opinion of the rabbis here either, as he admits that this woman is permanently forbidden to him because when he was born, she was classified as the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist. In fact, Rabbi Shimon disagreed only with regard to a different case where there were two brothers, one of whom died, and the second took the Yavama in yibum. If a third brother was subsequently born and afterward the second brother died, Rabbi Shimon maintains that the youngest brother may enter into yibum with this woman because she was never forbidden to him, as what occurred prior to his birth is of no relevance, since even in Rabbi Shimon's opinion it is possible to find a case in which the wife of a brother with whom he did not coexist is forbidden to him, it can be claimed that the Mishnah is taught in accordance with all opinions. So the Gemara raises another difficulty on this idea that the cases included are the ones on which all people basically agree. But didn't Rabbi Oshaya say that Rabbi Shimon disagreed even with regard to the first case? In other words, Rabbi Shimon disagreed not only in the case of a woman who entered into yibum before the younger brother was born, right? Because there were two brothers. One died, so the widow married the surviving brother. Then a third brother was born. And then the second brother died, and neither the first nor the second brother had kids. So the third brother, who was born after the first brother died, he never coexisted with the first brother. But he now comes up for yibum with the wife of the second brother. It's her second marriage, right? She married the first brother and he died. She married the second brother and he died. This is starting to sound like Tamar and the sons of Judah, right? Since both brothers, she married two men who both died without having children. Now there's a problem, is there a problem with this woman? We don't really want to give, another brother to this woman to marry. They're scared, right? So they really would prefer chalitza. But the question is even chalitza applicable since this brother never coexisted with her when she was with a brother with whom she was married first? Yeah, but then she became the wife of the second brother, right? So where does Rabbi Shimon come out on that? But didn't Rabbi Oshaya say that Rabbi Shimon disagreed even with regard to the first case? In other words, Rabbi Shimon disagreed not only in the case of a woman who entered into yibum before the younger brother was born, but even if the younger brother was born before the initial marriage took place. And the Gemara rejects this suggestion. This statement of Rabbi Oshaya was conclusively refuted. Consequently, it remains possible to say that the Mishnah does not deal with disputes. With this in mind, the Gemara states its objection. And didn't Rav Yehuda say that Rav said, and likewise Rabbi Chiya taught in a Baraisa with regard to all of those 15 women enumerated in the Mishnah, it is possible to find a scenario in which I would call them the woman who is forbidden to this brother is permitted to that brother, and the one who is forbidden to this brother is permitted to that brother, and consequently her sister, who is her sister-in-law, performs chalitza or enters into yibum. This complex situation can be demonstrated with regard to each of the women enumerated in the Mishnah. For example, if one sister is the mother-in-law of one brother and the second is the mother-in-law of another. That's where we're going to leave off. I'm just going to introduce this case to you, this very complex case where they had a dispute, which would seem to say, well, wait a minute, the cases are disputed. Rabbi Shimon disagrees with the rest of the rabbis on this. So this is the case which they're talking about. They're talking about it in shorthand because they spent a lot of time arguing about it. So you have this case where there's two sisters, Chaya and Miriam, and there are four brothers, Levi, Yitzhak, Reuven, and Shimon. Okay? Now, Chaya and Miriam are already widows. They already had kids. Each of them had a daughter. Chaya had a daughter, Dinah, and Miriam had a daughter, Bina. Okay? Dinah and Bina are the daughters of Miriam and Chaya. So Levi and Yitzhak marry these women that have daughters. Right? Levi marries Chaya, and so Dinah is his step daughter. And Yitzhak marries Miriam, and Bina is his stepdaughter. Right? He marries a woman who already had a daughter. Okay. And the other two brothers, Reuven and Shimon, marry the daughters. Reuven marries the daughter of Chaya, Dinah, and Shimon marries the daughter of Miriam, Bina. Complicated family, right? Then Levi and Yitzhak die. They never had kids, so yibum applies. Now, Reuven and Shimon, all four of them were brothers. So Reuven and Shimon are both up for yibum, potential candidates for yibum, because, right, Reuven's brother Levi died. Can he marry Chaya? No way, because her daughter is his wife. So no way is he going to be able to marry her and make Chaya and Dinah co-wives, mother and daughter co-wives. No way, it doesn't work. Shimon also, right? His brother, who was this Yitzhak, died, right? So can he come up for yibum with Miriam? No way, because if he married Miriam, then Miriam and Bina would be his co-wives, mother and daughter. Can Shimon marry Chaya? Why not? Why not? Right? She's not the sister of Bina. She's the aunt of Bina. Can an aunt and a niece be co-wives? Yeah, maybe. We don't have a direct prohibition of that, right? And likewise, Reuven, can he marry Miriam? right? Because Miriam is the aunt of Dinah, same thing. So here's a situation, very complicated for it to ever happen, really weird set of circumstances, but here Rabbi Shimon would permit them to have yibum or chalitza, and the rabbis would say, you know what, aunt and niece, close enough, co-wives, not gonna work. Nobody here is in yibum or chalitza situation. But we'll talk a little bit more about that on Friday at noon. No class tomorrow when it's Purim. Okay, let's see if there's any questions we can answer before we go off to complete our fast and do evening service. Okay, PK. If the man raped the woman, then he had to marry her and sustain the obligations of a husband. Who would see that this was done? Seems that men had the upper hand and could do pretty much what they wanted. Exactly. I mean, it's just a very harsh patriarchal system. The Torah came along and created obligations that never existed before, but it did not really solve the terrible imbalance in power that existed in the ancient world. Interestingly, over time, the sages did, right? Even in the most frum communities, some might argue that they're patriarchal, but these kinds of things don't happen. Charles says, perhaps the reason why the Torah says that if a man seduces an unmarried woman, he will provide a marriage contract was to teach that this act brings the responsibility of marriage. Exactly. Okay, that seems to be all the questions and comments that we have time for today. Nina is telling me. Great learning with you all. If you're finishing your fast, it may have been a meaningful fast. Now we're entering Purim. No class tomorrow. Let's all make the most of Purim. Celebrate. Tell the story. Hear the Megillah twice. Our obligation is to hear the Megillah Purim night tonight and Purim day tomorrow morning. It's also traditional to make a Purim Suda. The other mitzvahs, you should make gifts to the needy. If you don't have another way to do that, then when we read the Megillah tomorrow at noon Pacific, 3 p.m. Eastern, we're going to read the book of Esther in English. That doesn't satisfy your obligation to hear the Megillah in Hebrew. But if you have no other option, it's at least something. And we'll have the donate button on. And all the donations made tomorrow will just flow through our organization and we'll give it to the needy, right? People who are hungry, people who need shelter, etc. And sending gifts to your friends, right? That's the other obligation. Send a gift to 2 friends, enjoy a meal, get intoxicated, at least to the degree that you have trouble distinguishing between blessed is Mordechai and cursed is Haman. Hear the Megillah twice. And be besimcha, rejoice in Purim. All the best.